In this video, we're going to cover writing a methods section. And again, this is a bit of a review from the lecture where we already talked about writing a lab report, but I thought it'd be important to go over a few things one more time. So again, keep in mind when you write a scientific report, you want to start early, save often, make sure it's formatted correctly, and not plagiarized. Plagiarism will get you a 0 for the whole assignment. And plagiarism comes in a lot of different forms. It's copying things from the internet, it's copying things from your peers. In general, don't include quotes in the method section, in the introduction, and the results. And you want to cite all of your sources, both with your in-text citation and then at the end in your references or your literature cited page or your bibliography, whatever you call it. You want to be objective but persuasive. Remember your audience and then use a spelling and grammar check, but don't let that replace your proofreading. Read the whole thing aloud to yourself. You'll notice the errors a lot more easily that way. When I say formatted correctly, what I mean, again, is 11-point Times New Roman font, black ink, 1-inch margins all the way around, double spaced, left aligned, no title page, tables and figures at the very end. Remember the things that we talked about that make good science writing. It needs to be readable. You want to avoid those choppy sentences or very long or very short sentences. You want to make sure it has good spelling and grammar and punctuation, that your subjects and your verbs agree. You want to use complete sentences. You want to remember the rules for writing numbers and units if possible, or if needed, make sure you use superscripts or the correct symbols. Don't use slang. Don't use contractions. Don't use casual or imprecise adjectives. Cute really has no place in a scientific paper. Again, some technical details. Remember, we spent a fair amount of time on this. Don't use the first person or the second person. Don't say, I did this, or you. Measure the liquid. Keep in mind that if you start a sentence with a verb, get the reagents, measure the water, that's still second person. So you want to have it in third person. The scientist measured the water. You are a scientist now. You want to use the correct active voice. Remember, in active voice, the subject performs the action, whereas in passive voice, the subject receives the action. You want it to be in the correct tense. You're going to use past tense really for your method section because you use it anytime you discuss your project or a study or methodology from previous researchers. You want to be concise and avoid repetition of words, phrases, thoughts, and be careful with your jargon, your abbreviations, and your acronyms. Remember, active or passive voice. If you can insert the phrase by zombies after the verb, it's in passive voice. So, she was killed is passive voice because you can say she was killed by zombies. Whereas zombies killed her, active voice, because you can't say zombies killed by zombies her. That doesn't make any sense, right? So if you can put by zombies after your verb, it's in passive voice. Try it. For this, you're going to be doing a title and a method section. Remember, title, you've got an independent variable, your dependent variable, and then the organism. So the effects of increased salinity on blue whale, whatever the scientific name for blue whale is, diets on arterial blood pressure. You always want to use the full scientific name in a title if you're using an organism. You want to avoid abbreviations, except for like the most common abbreviations, like NASA or something. And you want to make sure that it's centered, bold, 11 points at the top of your page. If you refer to organisms, make sure in the first time you use both the common name and the scientific name. Place the name you plan to use throughout the paper first, whichever one is fine, and place the second one in parentheses. If you're using scientific names, you have to have the genus, species name. You capitalize the first letter of the genus name. Don't capitalize the species name. And when typing, you want to italicize both. Scientific names can be abbreviated by shortening the genus to the first letter. We do this with C. elegans. The C is the genus name. Remember, for our methods, you're going to describe what you did in enough detail that someone else could repeat your experiment or study. You want to write it in the past tense, in active voice, in third person. We practice this. You want to make sure you identify your control and your treatment groups. You want to cite the source of the protocol where you got this from. In this case, it's our lab handout, and you want to note any changes you did. Do not just copy and paste from the handout or the manual or the protocol. You want to put it in your own words. Don't include a bulleted list of materials. That's just for your own personal lab notebook. But do include the number of replicates and any statistics that you used with those alpha values. Details that you should include in your methods. Things like location, date, or season if you're doing a field study, the species you used, the chemical and reactants you use, including name, volume, and concentration, a time or a distance, again with units, the number of replicates per group, the number of groups run. If you're using any equipment, you need to include the name, model number, manufacturer name, manufacturer city. That's for things like specs, data loggers, analyzers, sensors, big pieces of equipment. And then you want to have a reference to where you got this protocol from, whether that's the lab handout, lab manual, or a peer-reviewed article. Remember, citation format. Most of your citations are going to be in the introduction or discussion, but you're usually on reference to a protocol and the methods, unless you're justifying your methodology. Your results really shouldn't have any citations. If you are citing things, you need to have them in the format of Nature. Again, the in-text with a little number. And then in your reference page, this is just a brief overview. Again, if you use Zotero, it will do this for you. And that is the end of our writing method section. Now write up the methods that for the reaction time lab and submit them on Canvas.